All right, welcome into the Musketeer Report Call-in Show. If you've never listened before, how we'll do this is we're going to talk Xavier basketball for the next 30 minutes to an hour, however long it goes. The show is dictated by your guys' calls. So if you see the little purple microphone down in the lower left-hand corner, you click on that. You can talk to me, and I'll bring you in, and we'll talk Xavier basketball. Obviously, some big news in the Xavier Musketeer sports world today. They're coming off the loss to Cincinnati in the Crosstown Shootout, 68-65 over the weekend. And then we got news today that Zach Freemantle is out indefinitely with a knee injury. So the Musketeers finished their non-conference slate at 8-3. And as they get ready to face UConn to open up Big East play, they're going to be doing so without their leading scorer and rebounder, Zach Freemantle, who is out with a knee injury. And quite honestly, what we know right now, Xavier publicly said it was a lower body injury. Sean Miller later confirmed on his coach's show tonight that it's a knee injury. He said it's unclear right now if Zach will be able to play again this season. There's an outside chance that he might, but he's definitely going to be out for several weeks. I think reading between the lines, it seems pretty clear that this is very likely a season-ending injury for Zach Freemantle. And I know a lot of people are wondering, well, what does that mean for Zach? What's his future look like? I've had people asking questions about potential redshirt status. I would say if this indeed is a season-ending injury for Zach Freemantle, I would think this is the end, at least for him and Xavier. Now, what he does, I can't guarantee anything, obviously, especially in this day and age in the NIL world and the transfer portal being what it is. First, he'd obviously have to get a waiver. He's already played in over the 30% of games that you're allowed to play in and still get a medical red shirt. So there's that hurdle that would have to be overcome. And then beyond that, I think for both parties, both he and Xavier, they need to move on and figure out what's next for both of them, assuming this is a season-ending injury. So, I mean, it's just terrible for Zach, a guy who has tried to fight back from multiple foot surgeries. He does so very well. He was playing really well. And then to see it come down to something like this, it wasn't that the foot didn't hold up. It was just another freak injury entirely that now has derailed his sixth and likely final season. Just a really tough blow for him. And obviously, who knows what that means for his professional prospects. I don't know that he was much of an NBA prospect to begin with, but overseas or other options for him were certainly on the table, and we'll just have to wait and see how he responds from that. First of all, what the actual injury is, how he responds from that, and where he goes from there. But I would not expect Zach Freemantle to be back at Xavier next season under any circumstances. Now, the next question, obviously, is how does Xavier adjust from here? And I would tell you, if any of you want to get in here with your calls, you want to talk about any of the stuff that we're talking about at any point, I will take your calls. You don't have to wait until I'm done or anything like that. So just jump in, and we'll continue to do this throughout the show. In terms of how Xavier responds, obviously Jerome Hunter is going to take over the starting spot at the center. You're giving up some size there, a couple inches going from Zach to Jerome. At the same time, I don't think Zach was like a very physically imposing presence as a defender or rebounder. So I don't think you're a ton different in that regard. Now, you are losing a ton offensively. There's no doubt about that. But I think Jerome can somewhat match what you were getting defensively out of Zach, and from a rebounding perspective, somewhat. He's not as good of a rebounder as Zach, but he can give you some of those things. John Hughley is going to have to become a much bigger part of this rotation. He's been playing, 10-ish minutes a game, a little over that maybe, and they certainly haven't been relying on him in key moments. That's all going to have to change now. I mean, you're not going to start him probably. He may not play more than half the game, but you're going to have to get legitimate minutes out of him going forward. And obviously, I think anybody who's seen him play to this point would be a little bit concerned about how that's going to go for Xavier if he has to play more minutes and be relied upon more heavily than he already has been to this point. The guy that I think is going to be asked to do the most now that he wasn't doing before is Dalen Swain. I think he has the most potential to lift this team. He is the guy that if you're a Xavier fan right now and you're hearing all of this news and you're looking at, well, what am I watching for the rest of the season if this thing really goes as bad as it could potentially, I think Dalen Swain is one of the big storylines going forward now. How does he develop? Can he become that dominant go-to, maybe all Big East type of performer that people had hopes for him prior to this season. He hasn't been nearly as assertive as they needed him to be so far on the offensive end. He played a little bit better in the Crosstown Shootout. We can talk more about that. But also, I mean, the consistency so far just hasn't been there from him at all. He didn't rebound at all in the UC game despite playing a little bit better offensively. He's going to need to change the way he's doing things, and this is a great opportunity for him to do that because the team's going to rely on him. We talked about him as a high school prospect when he played with All Ohio Red on the Nike EYBL circuit, which is the highest level of grassroots basketball that you can play. He didn't produce as much. He didn't score a lot. He was very passive on that team. But then when you would watch him play with his high school team, and he was clearly the best player on the floor in pretty much every game, and he ran the point guard often for them, or if not, he had the ball in his hands a lot for them, and he was forced to make plays and forced to be the best player on the court because his team required that of him. They relied upon him. He was a completely different player, and he was very dynamic, and he was tough to guard, and he was a creator. He was a shot maker. He did a little bit of everything for that high school team. Now, I'm not saying he's going to have the same type of impact for a Big East program that he did for his high school team, but I do think there could be something to the idea of Xavier now requires it of him. There are no other options. He has to be the guy in some regards that steps up for them and does more on the offensive end, especially. I think that could lead to some positive things for Dalen Swain. I think it could help his development a little bit and force him along, at least in terms of being a scorer. Obviously, he's already shown a lot defensively. He has to get more consistent as a rebounder. But I think from the offensive perspective, this could be a good thing for his development, and it's definitely going to test where he's at in terms of his development. All right, we have one request in here from the Xavier professor, so we'll bring him in, and we'll continue to roll along talking about how Xavier is going to adjust from this Zach Freemantle news. All right, Xavier professor, unmute yourself.
Can you hear me? Hello?
You got me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. We're good.
I got you.
So you're talking about the passivity somewhat that Dalen Swain has shown, at least thus far in his career at Xavier. How do you compare that to what Colby Jones was like in his early years? Because it seems like that was a big thing that changed whenever Sean came in and Colby had to be at least a little more assertive. And I don't think that totally happened until close to the end of that season, but I'm wondering if you're seeing Swain on a similar track that Colby was, because I think he had some passivity problems too when he was still at Xavier.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point to bring up. I hadn't really thought about those two as much just because I don't see them as being as similar, but there are some comparisons to draw there. And when I think about Colby as a sophomore, I'd have to go back and really look at the numbers, and I haven't done that. So please don't come after me on the message board or in the comments if I'm a little bit off here in terms of his usage. But it felt like to me that Colby was a little bit more involved in terms of the playmaking of the offense, had the ball in his hands a little bit more and was doing a little bit more in that regard. I think Xavier could get more of that out of Dalen Swain than they're getting right now. I don't know if he's up to it, but I think he could be. So that would be my first inclination to say. But yeah, I mean, the point you bring up is a good one. Could you see that type of jump from the end of this year until next year that we saw from Colby Jones, where he became more of a go-to offensive player for the Xavier team? And was he ever the most assertive guy as a scorer? No, but he continued to get more aggressive, not just as a scorer, but as a playmaker on the offensive end. And I think that's what you're looking for out of Dalen Swain. It's not just his ability to score, but if he's aggressive and looking for those opportunities, then he's going to create more opportunities for his teammates as well.
Well, my favorite moment of the Colby Jones aggression arc was the end of the DePaul game in the Big East tournament, where, we went into that game, we're supposed to steamroll, it's close, we're losing, and the staff just kept hitting the whatever set play it was of get Colby the ball, post up guard, score that way, and they press it was like 3 or 4 times in a row. I don't think Swain does a lot of backing guys down. I don't think that's a big part of his game at the moment. But at some point, I think this season we're just going to hit that button. It's like, Swain, you've got a size advantage. Use it. Just keep pressing that button until he takes over. On the Zach's injury, this obviously sucks. If his last shot in a Xavier uniform is missing a buzzer beater against UC, that's just
Oh,
that's just a tragedy. That's Shakespeare. Um, so I'm really hoping he at least gets back a little bit at some point this season. Um, I don't think I mean, we're gonna find out if John Hughley can play pretty quickly, I think. Um, I don't know. I hope he can. I bought a ton of Hughley stock, simply because I thought, like, when we got Jack Nungy, it was like 7 points, couple rebounds, can maybe shoot the three. And stat wise, that looked pretty similar to John, but we just haven't seen it yet. So here's hoping.
yeah. All right, that was a good call. I hadn't even thought about in all the news of today and chasing that. I hadn't even really stopped to think about that potentially being his last shot. That is a good point and a sobering one. That's tough to swallow as a Xavier fan, and I'm sure even tougher for Zach right now. Let's go to Johnny Blade.
Hello.
What's going on, Johnny?
Not too much. Feeling pretty bad. I got two kind of basic questions for you, just if you could hypothesize maybe. Would you kind of assume that Hughley is just is he gonna just start now, I guess, or do you think they're gonna do
No.
no?
No,
It'll just
yeah,
be
yeah. You probably popped on right after I said that, but right
Oh,
before we were
sorry.
talking to the no, you're all good. Right before we were talking to the last caller, I was just saying that Hunter is likely. I think Sean actually said tonight on his show that Hunter will be the starting center, and that seems
Oh,
pretty
okay.
obvious. I mean,
I
there's
haven't
just
listened to that yet.
yeah, there's just no way you can start John at this point with what he's shown you, and you can't set him up to play that many minutes. I mean, I
Right.
think it's pretty clear that Hunter is your really only option right now as the starting center, and then you are going to have to get more minutes out of John Hughley. That is
Yeah.
definitely going to be part of this. And then he also, Sean Miller said today, the part that we haven't gotten to yet is that Cam Fletcher is definitely going to enter the fold and start playing more minutes.
I did hear that. Yeah. So I guess I read somewhere, I can't, it was on Twitter somewhere. I don't remember who was saying it. That he was, I guess, they were expecting him to be kind of getting into his role at Christmas, and that's like where we are now, basically. So I guess because there was just some worry, just kind of on the message board about, there was assurances made to him and his family about not rushing him back too soon. So it sounds like that wouldn't really be the case if the Christmas thing is true, right?
I mean, I've been consistent on this since the start of time. I know the fans do not want to listen to it, and they keep like thinking things have changed. They have said this from the very beginning. Like, he was taken with next year in mind. They were going to be slow bringing him along. And then once we got into it and saw where he was at as he was fully cleared to practice everything, there was also just the element of him helping you win. I mean, you have Dalen
Right.
Swain, you have Marcus Foster, you have Jerome Hunter, all in that kind of hybrid small forward, power forward role in front of him. You didn't necessarily need another body, especially one thing that has been difficult for Cam since he came over is the two programs that he'd played in prior to Xavier were like polar opposites in terms of the defensive systems that they ran.
Oh,
So adapting to the pack line and getting used to the instincts and the reads within the pack line has been a challenge for him. I think that's
I
a big
see.
part of why they haven't really seen him as an impact piece to this point, even as he's been able to start giving them some minutes. And there's
Right.
also the fact that they did tell him and his family that they were going to bring him back slowly. And by the second semester, by the time they got into conference play, which going all the way back to the time that I wrote the impact article, this is what we've been saying, he would start to maybe work his way into the mix. Now with Zach Freemantle out, there is no doubt. It's not going to be he's starting to work his way back into the mix.
He's going to be.
He is going to see some minutes without question.
Yeah. Okay. And then I guess I was just kind of out of curiosity. Do you think, would they put Swain at the 5, do you think? Would they have like him do you think they'd have him doing that or no?
I don't think so, but I honestly wouldn't mind seeing it at this point. Is it really that much different from playing a Jerome Hunter there?
Well, right. Just have some like crazy small lineup out there.
Yeah, or
Him
maybe
at the
it's Marcus
5 kind of
Foster
thing.
if you feel like he's a little bit thicker and maybe a better rebounder
Yeah.
at this point. Maybe it's Marcus Foster, but I wouldn't mind seeing a true death lineup and just absolutely spreading the floor with shooters and guys that can space it. And maybe we get more of a glimpse of what we thought this team was going to play like and the style they were going to employ on the offensive end now than we have at any point this season. Because, I mean, this summer we all thought they were going to spread the floor, have small guards coming at you, shooting a bunch of threes, and that just never really materialized to this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bad situation, obviously, but, I mean, I guess maybe one bright spot is we could see some crazy lineups, so...
I hope we do. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
if it's going to be difficult and there are going to be a lot of unfun parts about this along the way, I think we all understand that. I hope we get some fun things to watch too. Maybe some stuff you wouldn't normally see and them really getting adventurous and trying some different things. You know, he talked about playing zone defense. That's going to be a thing that they have to do now to avoid foul trouble and just save some legs to some extent. And I'm interested to see where they go with that. You know, I mean, they can't really press with the lack of bodies that they have, but what type of zone might we see in the half court?
Could be fun. Well, awesome. Thanks, Rick. I appreciate you doing this.
Yep. Thanks, Johnny. All right. If any others of you want to get in with a call, feel free to hit that microphone button and request in. You know, that was part of the things I was thinking of when I was listening to Sean's radio show tonight was that offense and where things have kind of gone wrong this year. And I remember talking about it this summer when we were doing some of these call-in shows, and we would be talking about the guards and how they were going to be small and they would struggle defensively. And that is really where the whole, everyone's been throwing it back in our face, but the whole like, we're going to score 100, you're going to have to score 100 to beat us thing came from was we were talking about they were going to have to be able to do that because of their struggles defensively. And to this point in the season, their defensive efficiency is better than their offensive efficiency. And that's just hard to believe with the team that we expected them to have. And then also, you know, to the point that we were just talking about with Johnny there, you know, we've never really gotten to the point that we saw like Dante Maddox, Ryan Conwell, Davion McKnight. Obviously, Trey Green's out of the mix now, but he was originally thought to be part of that mix too, of like all these guys. You can throw Marcus Foster in the fold too, spreading the floor and shooting a bunch of threes and getting the ball moving. I just don't know that we ever really saw that in the way that we thought we might. Maybe the exhibition against Dayton. So I don't think it's going to look as good as we thought it would, but maybe this new lineup does bring that look to the team. Maybe they are really full-blown, spread you out with a super small lineup and shoot a ton of threes now. It remains to be seen, but that would seem to be the best option for them at this point. All right, let's go to Mick now. Mick, unmute yourself. I think we lost Mick. We're going to go to Dalen Swain fan club. What's going on?
Hey, can you hear me?
I got you.
I've got two points. One, we are down to what I think 8 healthy scholarship players, including Cameron Fletcher. Jerome has been known to kind of pick up some of these ticky-tacky fouls on the illegal screens over the back. John Hughley has picked up, you know, sometimes as many fouls and as many minutes as he's played. What the hell do we do if they pick up a quick 2 fouls each in the first 10 minutes of the game? Because then you're down to basically 6 guys for the rest of the half. You're forced to play Maddox. You're probably forced to play Fletcher for 20-plus minutes a game. What do you really do at that point?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the good news is if you're starting Jerome Hunter at the center spot already, how much of a difference is there if you have to go to Marcus Foster, Dalen Swain, or Cam Fletcher at that point at the center spot, right? Like, I mean, it can't be that different. So I think you just go to one of them. The other thing is, and Sean actually said this on his show tonight, like, we might see some walk-ons. If it's that bad of a situation, let's face it, probably a game they're not in a very good spot and don't have a great chance to win. Ian Sabarin is, like, he's a low-level D1 player. He's a tough 6'6" forward. He can give them some minutes in a pinch and get them through a 4-minute war as their center, I think, or undersized forward if they have to go that route. Now, obviously, that is not ideal for anyone, but if you're asking me, like, what do they do when all hell breaks loose and things get really bad, I mean, we really might see a walk-on.
Yeah. It wouldn't be unlike last season. I remember against Butler, I think we had Brad in the middle of January, so that was interesting. Final question around Davion McKnight. He has just been candidly a shell of himself since last season. I don't know if I can't imagine it's a confidence thing. You're a fifth-year player. You're coming off a great season, your first year at the high major level. But it just seems like whenever he drives, he's just getting swatted or getting bodied in the paint. He's not really making the great passes he was last season, that not getting guys open. I don't know if that has to do with, I don't want to connect it to Quincy was so good at creating his own shot. Conwell can create his own shot, but it seems like he struggled relative to Quincy. So what do you think is the cause of that? It seems like for him and Conwell, things kind of really turned starting with the Michigan game, and they both just have not really been the same since. And I guess you could say that was our real first test. Wake Forest and South Carolina were decent teams, but not great. So I don't know if it's just the skill of the teams we're playing, or if it's something else.
Yeah, I think it's partially that. I think Davion has been more in a funk and struggled more than Ryan has. But at the same time, Ryan has seen, if you're guarding Xavier right now, you really need one top perimeter defender to feel really good about your chances of stopping their offense, because especially with Zach being out of the mix now, you don't even have to worry about the front court. But before, it was you're going to have to put a front court player on Zach, but it's not going to be one of your perimeter guys. So whoever your best perimeter guy is going to guard Ryan Conwell, and Ryan Conwell hasn't been able to win a lot of one-on-one matchups against those guys and has had trouble getting separation against the better defensive teams, the more athletic defenders. So I think, it's both of them, to your point, have not given Xavier what they've needed from them. Davion has flat out struggled in some of these games, and I don't know that he can give them enough offensively consistently for what this group needs. Last year you had two main scorers on the perimeter, and he was able to be that third sidekick that, if he gave you a good game every third game or 2 out of every 3, you felt really good about it, but the consistency didn't necessarily have to be there as a scorer. This year, you look at it, and that was something I kept talking about over the first couple weeks of the season. It's man, this team is really relying heavily on the big 3 of Davion, Zach, and Ryan Conwell. And that doesn't seem like the recipe that it was supposed to be for this group. And that's when they were playing the weaker competition, the bye games that they were struggling with. And then, like you said, as they've gotten into the more difficult competition, it's gotten even worse from there. So it occurred to me while we were sitting inside Fifth Third Arena that Davion kind of reminds me of a former UC point guard, Justin Jennifer, that we talked a lot during the McCronin era, where it was he has a great assist-to-turnover ratio, so he gets praised by his coach and opposing coaches, and he can shoot a high enough percentage from three-point range that it looks like he's a decent three-point shooter, but in reality, teams aren't respecting his three-point shot. They're going underneath screens. They're playing off of him. It's kind of putting Xavier's offense in a tough spot at times because he's just not enough of a threat right now, and I think he can be that at times, but consistently, I don't know if he's capable of
it. A follow-up to that, and it kind of goes with the impression that maybe Sean is aware that this season is going to be challenging to make anything worthwhile of it. I don't know if he'll never flat out say that, obviously, but I'm sure he's got to be thinking that a bit. Do you think, and kind of going back to Dalen a bit as well, do you think guys like Dalen and Davion are going to get the green light when they get the ball, make something happen, enough of this, passing it around till there's 10 on the shot clock, trying to find that perfect shot where it's, our defense is clearly not, it's been all right, but, our defense is not going to be winning us these games. We need to score the ball. So do you see, again, back to the conversation about Dalen, him kind of getting that green light to be more aggressive? Because we saw it in the first half against UC. And I made a tweet that I thought it was hilarious that this was the game he chose to attack the basket every time he touched the ball. And then something, I don't know if it was adjustments by Wes Miller or adjustments by Sean for the second half. But after that, or in the second half, Dalen and Zach, I don't know how many points they combined for, but it was a fraction of what it was in the first half. So that was a bit confusing to me.
Yeah, well, I think probably Dalen made the adjustment, which is he quit being as aggressive. Now, maybe he didn't get the ball in the same spots. I don't know. But I do know, early in the game, he had one against Seamus Lukosius and one against Dan Skillings where he caught the ball and he just went at them. And he scored on both of them. And both plays looked a lot like the type of plays that we saw from him often during preseason practices. Now, you probably saw a lot of the write-ups, and people bring these up from time to time about the praise that he was receiving during the preseason. And I mentioned at the time that he was inconsistent. It wasn't like that every day, but when he did take over, man, he would take over in practice, and it was just like, no one in the gym can guard this guy when he does that. I think we saw that for at least 2 possessions early on in this game, and it was great to see that mentality from him, but he just doesn't keep that mentality throughout games. And asking about whether or not he has the green light, absolutely, but he's had it since the start of the season. They've been trying to get that out of him every single game. It's up to him in some regards to play that way. Now, the part with Zach, I think early with what UC was doing defensively is they were doing a drop ball screen coverage when Zach was setting the screen. And even if Zach wasn't setting a screen, even if one of the guards just drove into the lane, the center, Aziz Bandega, who was guarding Zach, would just stay in the lane as rim protection. So what Xavier was doing was constantly either having Zach pick and pop, and Aziz wouldn't stay with him. He'd drop into the lane and stay as rim protection. Or if one of the guards drove for Xavier, they would have Zach replace them up at the top of the key. And then when Aziz was there at the rim and the defense collapsed, they could then look and turn and kick it out to Zach, and he'd be open at the top of the key. That's why we saw him around that free throw line area or shooting those jumpers from the top of the key, and he was wide open so often. In the second half, Zach, for whatever reason, stopped using the pick and pop and the short roll. A lot of times after he'd set a screen, he'd kind of just fade into the lane on a roll, and they'd never really get the ball to him. I don't know if that was part fatigue setting in, like Sean Miller alluded to after the game, or if for some reason Xavier thought it wasn't as good to have him in that short roll or that pick and pop as often. But part of the other thing is, I think everyone said, Ryan Conwell, you got to be more aggressive than just taking a couple of shots in the first half, man. We need more out of you. So now all of a sudden, instead of looking to stop in the lane, kick it out to Zach Freemantle on the perimeter, Ryan Conwell is now driving in the lane, looking to get his and shooting the shot or trying to make a play. And so Zach just wasn't the default option there in their offense, and they kind of went away from that. I think that's what happened with Zach, and that was a little bit different from why Dalen just disappeared.
Yeah, it was a bit bewildering. You always see guys, they have very strong first halves and they fade in the second half, and I always wonder, why would you change anything? Then obviously coaches make defensive adjustments, so I wasn't positive about what happened there. Yeah,
I mean, and Wes Miller even said after the game, they didn't do anything different. He did think that his guys did a better job of having good positioning and staying in front of Zach, which is coach speak for saying we didn't do anything different. Zach just didn't score against us in the second half. And I watching it back on film last night Saturday night after the game was over, that's exactly what I saw. I don't think they changed their strategy. I think Xavier kind of went away from that for whatever reason. And part of that might have just been Zach was getting a little more fatigued and wasn't as sharp on hey, if a guy drives or if I set a screen, I've got to get into this opening or along the perimeter as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Do you think any of that could have potentially been, not to make excuses, from that hard fall he took?
Well, that didn't happen until the final 5 minutes, right? It happened with 5 minutes to go.
Was that late in the game?
Yeah, it was about around somewhere between 5 or 4 minutes to go. We have the video up on Musketeer Report. But yeah, so he played those final 4 or 5 minutes with the injury, but that we had already played most of the second half with him not doing much and them not really getting him the ball in those same spots.
Okay, yeah, I thought I remembered that way earlier in the second half, but yeah, that's all the questions I have. Thanks, Rick.
All right, I appreciate it. Thanks for checking in. And I'll continue to take calls from any of you guys if you have questions to get in here. I have a few more points to make about the Crosstown Shootout. I think we've pretty much covered the Zach Freemantle news as much as we can, but I'm fine to take more questions on that if you guys have any. As far as the Crosstown Shootout, I think from a big picture perspective, when we looked at this game, someone had asked me before it started, how would you rank the top 5 players in this game between both teams? And I said, I don't feel strongly about this, but I think it's possible that Xavier has the best 2 players. UC might have the next best 4 after that, but Zach Freemantle and Ryan Conwell might be the best two players on the floor in this game. They took turns having good halves in this game, but they weren't good enough for Xavier to be, well, they were close. I mean, Xavier had the game won. Let's be honest, they gave it away. But those two didn't really play like the best players on the floor for a complete game. And I thought that made it tough for Xavier to come away with the win, especially in the end when, Ryan Conwell has that bad alley-oop pass that he tried to throw to Zach that resulted in a turnover. Zach has the ball with like about 2.5 minutes where he just throws it out of bounds on the sideline. I think he thought Dalen was going to come up and take a dribble handoff, and Dalen went to cut back door. So you can't have your two best players committing crucial turnovers in the final moments of the game where you're looking to lean on them and have them pull out a win for you. I also thought Xavier's lack of athleticism was a problem, and it really stood out with all of the lobs that UC was throwing over top of them. I mean, to see that many oops successfully in just one half, much less an entire game, was glaring. And then also Xavier was fouling a lot because of their lack of athleticism, I thought. And that allowed UC to get to the free throw line. I think if Xavier had had an advantage at the free throw line in this game, which is something UC typically doesn't do very well, they don't get to the free throw line a lot on their end, then Xavier's in a much better spot. But instead, the Musketeers weren't able to guard them without fouling. They put them at the free throw line a lot, and UC ends up keeping pace with the Musketeers at the free throw line, actually outscoring them a little bit there as a result, and ultimately winning the game. I thought the ending was a complete disaster. Again, good experienced players like Davion McKnight, Zach Freemantle, Ryan Conwell, you can't have that happen to them. You might lose. You might not pull that one out. But when your best players like that just kind of give the game away and can't make a play for you, and then on the other end, you see these guys who have been struggling, Lukosius, Jizzle James, did not have good games. They step up and they make the big shots. They make the big plays in the final possessions. That's not good. That's a tough look. The final shot, I had no problem with them going to Zach Freemantle. Now, obviously, I didn't know at the time that he had a knee injury. Maybe I would have changed my mind if they knew that he had a potentially season-ending knee injury going on, but I don't think they probably knew that at the time. He was running on adrenaline, said he was fine. Ryan Conwell is going to be hounded by them. They're going to do everything they can not to let Ryan Conwell get a three-up, given he had just hit a couple of clutch ones late to give Xavier a chance. And let's face it, Ryan Conwell has had issues getting separation from good defenders, especially UC's athletic perimeter players. So, I mean, in that situation, you knew you were going to give yourself a wide open look for Zach Freemantle. That's exactly what they got. I think you have to live with the result there. He missed it, but when you can give yourself a wide open look for your leading scorer, yeah, three-point shooting isn't really his game, but he's more than capable of knocking that down. He had already made a three in the game. I think you feel pretty good about that shot, and you just live with the result. All right, let's go to Doc Rock. Doc, what's going on?
Rough couple days for a Xavier fan, man. Wow.
It is.
Between the ending of that UC game and then the news about Zach Freemantle, it's pretty tough, man. My first thoughts, as I think most Xavier fans, was just brutal for Zach. I mean, as a fan, I'm worried about how we're going to do and win games and all that. But just a great kid that's gone through so much, and then have this happen to him is just. It's just tough, It's tough. It's sad. My question for you, Rick, is you addressed the Swain, and that if we're going to move forward and have any kind of we'll call it success, for lack of a better word, that Swain's going to have to step up. Do you think it needs to be? Are you assuming everybody else needs to pick up a little bit, or do you see one or two other guys that really need to pick up that difference? Because we're going to pick up 15 or 20 points some games. So where are those points going to come from? I'm not hearing a lot of enthusiasm about Hunter at this point. So the numbers are getting kind of Maddox. I thought he had turned the corner, but then he turned around and did the same shit this last game that he was doing there for a while, coming down and firing up shots early in the clock. And I was very disappointed in him, and my hopes were really high. I think we're going to really need him to listen to what the coach says and play the game that he wants the coach to play in his role. So anyway, Maddox picking up a little bit, everybody else picking up a little bit. Do you think somebody needs to really step up large besides Swain, and who do you think that is? And I'll just step out and let you address that. Thanks for all you do, Rick.
All right, thanks. Yes, Swain, definitely. That is the big one. But I think Dante Maddox is the guy for me, Doc. Coming into the year, that was one of the guys. I mean, that was a big transfer portal get for Xavier. They were going up against Illinois, Louisville, big NIL dollars to land him. And they were able to reel him in. That was a big get at the time. They were expecting, or at least all the national media types and us, we were talking about this, and everyone was excited during the summer about what this offense could be. We're excited about the idea of Ryan Conwell and Dante Maddox and their three-point shooting ability. And this team, I mean, again, because you're replacing a clear high major talent and a guy who was on NBA radars, who knows where he's at this point, but a Desmond Claude talent who, for all his flaws, was 6'5", athletic, could get by you off the dribble, caused some matchup problems, and a guy in Quincy Oliveri who led the Big East in scoring and is now getting some opportunities in the NBA with the Lakers. That's a lot to replace. And we were all kind of bought in on this idea that the whole with Xavier's new guards from the mid-major level and all the shooting and skill that they were going to bring within Sean Miller's system and the way they fit with that pace and the three-point shooting, along with an improved front court, was going to be the whole was going to be better than the sum of the parts. And that never materialized. And I think a big part of that reason, the reason it hasn't been, the reality hasn't been close to what we thought the potential was, is because the Dante Maddox role never really materialized in this offense. I think a lot of us had him pegged in for a double-digit type scorer that would be a big boost from three-point range in this lineup, and that just didn't happen. So maybe this is the opportunity for him now that, there's not going to be as much – they still have guards, but there's not going to be as much yanking him out of the game. We talked about that with Trey Green. He's going to have some extended playing time, and they're going to have to get scoring from somebody. He's one of the guys on this roster with the potential to do it. They don't have a lot of those. I mean, people are talking about Cam Fletcher. What's his role going to be? At the end of the coaches show tonight, Joe Sunderman asked Sean Miller, what's Cam going to bring you offensively? You say he's a good rebounder, but can he be a type of guy that gives you 12 points a game on the offense? And Sean Miller was like, no, he's not. He's a guy that can maybe make some open threes, but he's a rebounder and a defender and an athlete, and we don't really want him handling the ball a lot or trying to make plays or reads within the offense. And so, his role is going to be a little bit more limited on that end. I think you're really going to have to be relying on Dalen Swain and Dante Maddox stepping up. All right. Any other calls if you want to get here? We'll probably wrap this up in the next few minutes here, so feel free to jump in here. We'll talk about whatever you got on your mind. But just wrapping up the thoughts from the Crosstown Shootout. Again, I think we talked about this some with McKnight, but you got to get more than 2 points and 3 field goal attempts out of him. 9 assists and 3 turnovers is great, but 2 points and 3 field goal attempts from your starting point guard and a guy that you were looking at to be, especially after the season got going, you were looking at him to be a much bigger piece of this offense. That's not getting it done. Let's go to Nick. Nick, unmute yourself.
What's up, Rick? Thanks for taking my call, man.
Yeah,
hey,
thanks for
just
coming.
wanted to pop in. I think, going forward, this is going to be a big soul-searching time, I think, for Cohen, Dante, guys like that decided, hey, they had it maybe back in their minds, like, hey, what if, Hunter, Freemantle go down again? I think it's going to be a big soul-searching time. I think going after guys that maybe aren't hurt multiple times in their career is just extremely frustrating. I don't know. That's just what I got, man. It's tough. I don't know if there's a right answer, but I don't know. We got too many guys with knee injuries and stuff. It would be nice just to play a full year, but go with what we got.
No doubt. I think that's the way all Xavier fans are feeling right now, is just snake bitten to some extent. I mean, let's face it, this season wasn't going in the direction and everyone was hoping for already at 8-3, and obviously not the resume that you wanted in the non-conference. But with Zach Freemantle, you're still competitive. You still feel like a middle of the pack Big East team that's going to be hopefully on the bubble. And now this could become really rough. I think even Sean Miller acknowledged that in his coaches show tonight, that it's going to be really difficult for them. And if you're a Xavier fan, that's just tough, especially coming off the year you had last year with all the injuries that felt like a lost season in a lot of ways, to potentially have another one of those. And I don't want to be too pessimistic on here, but I know we have a lot of season left. But let's face it, I mean, you're in the Big East. It's tough to win regardless when you have everyone fully healthy. Going at it without two starting centers that you expected to have when the year started, that's going to be really difficult. And I think one of the other things is big picture looking forward for Xavier fans is it's like, where do you go from here? This feels like a pretty big moment in the program's history, not because of the lack of success recently as much, or some like the last 7 years haven't been good enough or something like that, like I've seen on the message board today, but more so because the entire college sports landscape just shifted within the last 2 years. And last year it obviously didn't work out for Xavier for a multitude of reasons, but they came back and they said, okay, well, we're going to rework our strategy for roster building and we're going to go a completely different direction. And now it feels like that didn't quite work either. So you can blame injuries, but there also has to be some figuring out of how you work roster building in 2024 at a university like Xavier, where you're not going to have the same resources in NIL as some of the top schools, but you have enough NIL resources to be competitive within your conference. That's going to be a major challenge for them going forward. It's like, do you continue to work the process of what you sort of started here now? Is there a process to continue working with this current group? Or are you kind of in a completely rebuild, rework your strategy mode now when it comes to putting together next year's roster? That remains to be seen, and I think it's a really important question for the future of Xavier basketball. As you go forward in this NIL and transfer portal era, you're going to have to find your place in the sport, and everybody's trying to figure that out at the same time right now. It's not easy for anyone, but we've seen other teams have success that are in a similar spot as Xavier. So we know it can be done. It's not just like, oh, they don't have the same resources, so they're never going to be competitive again, or they're in a high major conference like the Big East, and the conference realignment has left them out in the cold. It's just the SEC and the Big Ten or something like that. I don't believe any of that. I don't think that's the case. I think Xavier can still very much be a competitive basketball program at the top of the sport for a long time to come. But I completely understand why fans are going to look at this current situation and say, okay, but where do we go from here? What's the plan? What's the strategy? And how do we get out of this? The good news is you have to feel really confident with the people you've got in place. I think if you're asking anyone, who do you want leading you going forward in this situation, most Xavier fans are going to respond with the same answer, and that's Sean Miller. So that's probably a good place to leave it. I don't see any other calls here. I appreciate those of you that did call in and joined us for this one. I hope it was somewhat worth listening to. I know it's a tough time for Xavier fans with all of this going on and the season already getting off to a start that you weren't hoping for, but it's always still fun to follow the college basketball season. There will be surprises that we didn't expect. There will be some type of crazy game where someone has like a career milestone or a high-scoring night that has us all going nuts on social media. We'll still have plenty of events throughout the year that we'll enjoy together. And then it's all about rebuilding the roster for next season. We'll talk recruiting. We'll talk transfer portal. We'll still be here breaking it all down at Musketeer Report. And I appreciate all of you who are sticking with us. The message board, honestly, has been pretty great. I know it's dark right now. I know people are upset and frustrated, but it hasn't been too over the top, I don't think, like we've seen in some situations in the past. And people have been really active on there and constantly communicating. So I appreciate all of you that have signed up. There are still a few more days left of a 50% off sale before Christmas. If you want to get signed up, or you know a Xavier fan who's not a subscriber and you want to get them a Christmas gift, please do so and take action on that 50% off deal. So thank you all for tuning into this, and we'll talk about it more on the message board.